everybody who's joined so far. We currently have a small yet uncertain nimble group on. We'll wait a few more minutes and see if other people join us. Okay. Crystal, do you think it's okay to go ahead and get started?
I do. Hello, everyone.
Yes, welcome everybody. Welcome Crystal, Tristan, and Eric as we work through today. Who's running the PowerPoint? Crystal, you got the buttons?
I do.
Tristan,
Yep.
all right, let's go. Next slide. So today we're going to look at our timeline. We have worked hard to get some clarity on where we need to be. That's good news, but it's also a bit of a rush. We need to move quickly moving forward based upon what our total timeline is. So we are at the 19th. And today we're going to pick up our tiered licensing conversation, look at the specifics of Montana, and think about what exactly we want to adjust. Next week, we're going to give you some time today to look at the remaining pieces of the ARM with some clear lenses to look at. And then at next week's meeting, Crystal and her team are going to bring us some bullet points of specific places where they see difficulty in the cases that they see for us to address. The goal being by the conclusion of next week's meeting, we can really have identified places where we want to make adjustments. We don't have to have specific language necessarily done yet, but some clear places where we want to make adjustments. Then there's a little bit of a gray area here, but what can happen if all goes well by the end of next week and we've got those clear places within the current ARM where we want to make adjustments, then we can send that to OPI's legal team who will do the actual wording adjustments for us. Send that back to us in 2 weeks to come back on the 9th and have the group fully agree upon what they want to send to the superintendent to review with the possibility of sending forward. The superintendent then would have a week to look at it, send that forward to the board for the meeting on the 16th. And then after the 16th, then the board really needs to begin their process. Looking at you, McCall, as the 16th is an informational meeting of our recommendations. And then after that, CISPAC would need to review those recommendations. And then they move into sort of meeting 3 in November of the board. And then the public notification feedback process, looking for final adoption in January.
So sorry, Jacob, I just want to clarify a little bit. Actually, the recommendations will go to CISPAC first. CISPAC will have an opportunity to look at them, make adjustments, and then they'll go to the board.
So then CISPAC would need to, so they meet in October, or would they meet before?
They meet in October. We could ask them to be flexible if we need to, but that is how it sits right now.
So in that timeline, as we were thinking, if we informationally present what will be really the recommendations this group puts forth to the board on the 16th, does CISPAC need to look at them before the 16th? Or
That would
does-
be the idea,
Yes.
because then CISBAC has the opportunity to provide comments back to OPI and make changes before those go to the board. Because what will happen, it'll go to the board as an information item. The next time the board sees it, the board will make a determination to send it to a notice of public hearing. Then there is a very public process that is totally separate, specific to these administrative rules. And then the third time the board sees it is when they vote upon it.
Does that timeline work then to give a week with that, or does it seem better that we try to finalize everything from this task force by the 2nd?
I certainly don't want to rush anything for this task force. I think that we can be flexible, but just keeping that timeline, I suppose, at least though that is what needs to happen from our end. I don't necessarily want to put dates on that because I'm not sure where we're going to end up here. And I don't want to put pressure on this group to feel like they have to hurry to get all of their information done. And I want to make sure that the board has time, CISBAC has time, this group has time.
Yeah, this is Cheryl. Let me add a piece for you, Jacob. And that is that the Board of Public Ed in their meetings last September designated or delegated this responsibility to the OPI. So I think that's really important to keep that in mind.
Sharon, you had your hand up.
Yes, I'm not quite sure if I understood the deputy superintendent correctly, but at any rate, as a former chair of the BPE, I would say that it is most important that this task force does a thorough job of vetting this first, and that the initial presentation actually does go to CISPAC. McCall is right. Sometimes those changes can be made, but I think us hurrying our process is not what the Board of Public Ed wants. Thank you.
So then I guess my question would be, do we wait and have everything for CISBAC in October as the first step, but then that's pushing back the 3 meetings for the Board of Public Ed? And I wasn't sure if that was what we were wanting either. So I'm glad we're taking the time now to sort of discuss this, because I agree, I don't want to rush through it, but I also know that collaboratively, we do see a lot of need for change. So we don't want to miss anything either and get things going. So it's that sense of urgency without rushing. But I guess I just want to be really clear on what we're looking at in terms of the timeline. So I guess my question coming from that is, do we not have anything for the board for September? Do we wait for CISBAC in October? But then that would push back, how we have to have the 3 meetings for the board. Am I understanding that correctly, I guess?
Sorry, Crystal, is that to me?
Anybody that wants to, chime in. I just want to be sure we're all on the same page. And like Sharon said, everyone's saying we don't want to rush it, but we also want to be sure the information's going to the people that it needs to go to.
And I think we could probably have that conversation maybe offline if you guys want. So we're not taking up too much time here, and we can decide how we want that to look. Just knowing that it needs to go to CISBAC, then the board, then the notice of public hearing. As long as we can agree upon that, I think that's fine, and we can talk dates at a later time.
Perfect. That's fine. We do not need to take any more time. Thank you. With that said, I'm moving forward, Jacob.
Yeah, good. That works for me. People just need to tell me where I need to be and when to be there. That's the key piece. So a friendly reminder again of our norms. We know these well. And we are well versed in them. So we can move on to our next slide, which is tiered licensure. So Crystal, if you're sharing your complete screen, if you could just click on that link. We shared several different resources this week for everybody to look at. A key resource that was in this group, if you scroll down, Crystal, is the first one here, the policy brief from SREB that looked at 5 states and tiered licensure. So hopefully everybody had a chance at a minimum to read this document. And we wanted to ask you very specifically, from the readings that you had a chance to look at, what did you see that you thought could be a component to consider in our conversations? All right. So what takeaways did you have from the readings? Tristan will be capturing this in the background as we talk, but anybody, so what did you see in looking at other tiered licensure systems that were your takeaways, key components?
One of the things that I think stood out for me was right off the bat, I think it was Arkansas in the continuum and the notion of making sure that once somebody's done, that they still have the education continuum continues for them. And I think that was very interesting. And I'm just off a visit with John Mielek, and we were talking about where Montana sits, is such a small number of folks who don't have tiered licensure as perhaps we've defined it for others. So those are just a couple of takeaways that I had from what I saw.
So McCall, I'm going to come to you next, but Angela, can you expand upon your point? So whenever you say that continuum, how does that contrast with what's in Montana currently?
Well, one of the things, Jacob, that we've been talking about as members of this committee is, once our folks leave the EPPs, what that structure of support looks like for them. And so we know that there is the mentoring programs work, and we think that there's an opportunity, a number of us do, to support an education continuum in Montana through some type of licensure requirement around ensuring a mentorship piece upon the initial application for a license. So that's where I was going with that. And we have the continuum, and I know that we go from the class 2 to the class 1, with the master's degree. So there's that piece. But part of what a number of us have been talking about is the importance of ensuring that continuum once a student graduates from an EPP, and ensuring that there's a continuum of support in their first several years of teaching, because the data shows that we lose so many teachers in their first 3 to 5 years of teaching. And perhaps that's where we need to be providing opportunities for that education continuum the most. And I do have, just to speak to that, I do have a document that a number of us have just been kind of chewing on as an illustration of perhaps what we could take a look at with chapter 2, with class 2 licenses, if folks would be so inclined to take a look at that.
So let's save that for a little bit, but thank you, Angela. Yes. And so McCall, you had your hand up. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to share some observations I had. I thought this was actually a really interesting document. And I liked being able to see kind of side by side all of the different tiers of licensing for other states. Like I said, a few observations I had. I was really interested to see and surprised to see that there were a lot of states that license teachers before they've finished an educator prep program. And I'd be interested to learn more and to see more if there was data around that as to students who had a license before graduating and whether they stayed in the system and what exactly it looks like for them to have that license. And if they, were in the classroom sooner, which then made them feel more comfortable being in the classroom on their own outside of their student teaching opportunity. So I was really interested on that piece. I was also very surprised, since we talked a lot about the praxis and testing, and I was also very surprised to see how many states still require multiple different tests outside of something like the praxis, just like very tailored to their states. I think Wisconsin was one, I can't remember, maybe, that had like multiple state tests that also had to be passed by an educator prior to licensure. So I thought that was interesting. And then I really liked let's see. I was really grateful to see the Montana kind of outline of what the pathway looked like, kind of dumbed down. I mean, we've all seen the arms, but I just think that looking at it this way was really interesting, and I think helpful to kind of put it side by side to what others are doing. So I think as we go through that, it'll be kind of easier to see and compare to other states. So I was grateful for that too. Thanks.
Thank you, McCall. Other thoughts on the readings that we looked at?
I think John has his hand up.
Oh, John, sorry, go ahead.
No worries, Jacob. I figured we just reached the point in our relationship where I volunteer, you ignore, and we move on. So
You must have been hanging out at my house.
Couple of things is I really appreciated what you all sent from the Education Commission of States, and while it's not tied directly to tiered licensure, I thought it did have some really interesting information about what some states are doing around new licenses, and then specifically what they're doing to limit the barriers for out-of-state teachers. And I thought there's some alignment to some of the things that we've spoken about. And there were some other ideas that maybe we haven't, had an opportunity to discuss yet. So I thought that was a really interesting document. In the tiered licensing, I would agree with what other folks have said about, the number of states that have some type of a licensing, tiered licensure structure. But I thought what was interesting is how many of them have to move through the tiers, that they have to have some type of an induction and mentoring component, which is really at the district level. And in order to progress through the tiered systems, you have to have showed effective teaching. And so I thought that was a really nice component of a licensing system, to have successful teaching experience being evidence to move through those systems.
Can you give us an example of one of those? Which state had that?
Maryland, you have to complete an induction program, have recommendations from the supervisors or evaluations that show student growth, and that's how you move through the system. The Minnesota model has the 3 years teaching experience and your summative evaluation. You can't have an improvement plan. You have to be a successful teacher. Wisconsin, you had to submit a portfolio, videos of your teaching. Those were reviewed by folks at the state. Not that I'm advocating that we send more things to the state to review, but that North Carolina, you have to be proficient on their teaching standards. So almost every state that they had on here had some type of a activity that you completed in your teaching in your classroom in order to be moved into advanced credentials.
Thank you, John. So Sue, and then Sharon after Sue. So Sue.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. A couple of things. I thoroughly enjoyed reading these articles, and I can't remember which one mentioned this, but I especially liked the area where they mentioned the CTE specifically. I just think that's an area we need to expand in, and it's a non-traditional teaching role. And so just having a clear avenue for somebody who teaches in that field to get licensed and to move on through the tiers, I think is a good move. I also share the concern that some of these things in here are district responsibilities, the evaluations, who's the good teacher. And I don't know that we need to get into the tiered system. But I'm also very excited that we're looking at being innovative. We do a lot of talk about innovation, but yet we kind of tend to fall back into what's comfortable for us, what we've always done. So it's really kind of invigorating to see some real innovation in a tiered licensure program. I think that's all I want to mention right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. Sharon?
Thank you. Like John, I noticed several of the tiered licensure programs required mentorship and induction as a precursor to the next level. In Montana, Chapter 55 for accreditation also requires that. However, I've seen it happen in my school districts and in many neighboring school districts where we check the box and our district says we're offering that, but actually I don't think is asked to provide any evidence that it exists or when in fact those are delivered. So I feel like there's a good opportunity for us here to connect with that in a little deeper way in Chapter 57. It already exists in Chapter 55. So I think that in Chapter 57, it would just be a natural progression of events there. Thank you.
Diane?
I see so many opportunities for us here. As I look at the other states, some of them look complicated considering the number of staff we have. And I think that's one of the issues that has to always be a consideration for us. But I also know that Montana does things well. And we plan for the capacity that we have, but also the way we work together. And so I would just echo what Sharon has said, the induction and mentoring programs, I know we lose a lot of teachers. And didn't see the data necessarily from other states on that. And it isn't necessarily that it's truly because of induction and mentoring. But I think if we were to enhance those programs in a Montana way, that makes it like what other states have. But there's almost no way not to take it down to the districts having some role in showing that the licensees have made it through the year, or somehow document that. It's just, I think it would be difficult otherwise. That's just a long way of saying, I think we can look at what other states have done. I think it will be helpful to us. And I think we can, and it was helpful to me to see what other states had done. But I'm going to add one more caution that I saw. The value-added assessment program is why I would say I'd rather have our school districts get to the nuts and bolts about whether a teacher was successful than to try to use any type of value-added assessment in order to tie that together. That's just a problem in so many licensure areas or endorsement areas. I don't think it's possible. So that's just something that I read that I thought, no, that's not what I think would work in Montana. But anyway, that's a long way of saying I appreciated all the documents that you provided and looking into those. And I think we can find some creative ways to meet the needs that we're hearing, both from OPI and from our districts, and still do it the Montana way, but we do it well by collaborating well among all of our groups. So thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Any last kind of comments on this? Crystal, if you could move to the next slide and then quickly open that document that sort of shows the Montana licensing that McCall had referenced.
Jacob,
Sure.
Jewel has her
I
hand
have
up.
Jewel, yep,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry, Jewel.
Yeah.
I see it now. Go ahead, Jewel.
Thank you. I was just going to add that recently I listened to a webinar. There was a series of 3 that talked about the interview process for educators. And in that, it talked about induction and mentoring being so important. But added to that was the fact that it really needs to be personalized in order to develop the relationships and make the connections that make that effective. So I guess I just wanted to add that. I think that this is an important conversation, but the personalization of that and developing the relationships will have an impact on the retention of educators. So that's my comment on that topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Jewel. So Crystal's going to open this up, and Sharon, I'm going to put you on the spot if I can, because I'd love to hear more about your thinking. So you mentioned the language that's in chapter 55 around mentoring within the accreditation process, and then it being a natural progression to think about that in 57. So we have essentially, this is the, if Montana, if we want to say it has a tiered structure, this is what it looks like, what Crystal has on the screen. Moving from class 5 to 2 to 1. Things that are highlighted in yellow are highlighting things we've talked about previously that we think could be points for adjustment. But to what I want to ask you, Sharon, is what would be that pathway to have some sort of, that mentoring support in chapter 57? Or does it live in 55? And because it seems to get muddy in trying to think about that. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts about what you're thinking in terms of that.
Well, and Angela has alluded to maybe a little bit of that in a previous meeting, maybe, but there's a potential for that in class 2. So if we made class 2, isn't it already there's already a second tier level in class 2 with non-traditional teaching programs, I think. So if a teacher had a traditional class 2 license and in that time frame spent some time in a mentoring program sponsored by and tailored by their own school district, tailored for each new teacher, and an induction and or mentoring program. I'm not sure what that would look like, but if the opportunity existed in a standard class 2 license, then maybe that would also in some ways stop some of the emergency endorsements that are happening, because that tiered level could belong in there. I'm not sure if I'm being clear enough in terms of a language revision about that, but that certainly speaks to something that I had thought about myself for quite some time, that there's an opportunity in your class 2 to tier that. So your first year is spent in mentoring and induction, but it's with the participation of the local district. It's not casting that responsibility back to OPI. Yes, it's casting it back to the school district, and perhaps in our local school districts, they don't have enough time for that either. But I think, and I've spoken to this before, that a really good mentoring and induction program does involve your experienced teachers in your school system, and it involves paying them, which I think isn't, of course, is not part of any Board of Public Ed rule to award teachers monetarily. So I know we have to be careful there, but it does allow us an opportunity also to engage our more experienced teachers in each school building in a relevant program that actually would then bring your class 2 teachers to their next level within a year, within 2. I don't know. In Ekalaka, we have a lot of folks who stay just for a year or just for 2. Perhaps there should be some sort of incentive for them to stay longer, and maybe we should build it into this program. Other than just a general overview, I'm not sure if that provided you with enough information.
It does, and the big implications that come to me would be like who builds that system, who supports that system, and then we're not. I know you're very clear in we don't want to put more work on OPI, but it's still OPI would have to be responsible in some ways of ensuring that if that is part of the licensure progression, that it took place, right? So then what does that look like? So those are questions to chew on.
Right, and I see Angela nodding a lot, so I know she and I have spoken, not in this period of time necessarily, but for many years before this, about a potential for this existing. So I'll stop.
So Angela, you have thoughts?
I have a number of them on this. I have actually taken and really looked at 57 as it pertains to class 2, and have done a markup of it and I don't know if I'd be allowed to share it, or if you'd like me just to verbally walk the group through what a number of us have discussed, and a lot of the emerging themes that have already happened today, even as we discuss the document. So whatever you would prefer there.
Tristan, Crystal, is it possible to give Angela permission to share? Is that a thing?
Yeah, working on it. Angela, you should see a share screen button on the bottom of your screen.
So this will stop other screen sharing? Yes. Okay, so I want to just take a second and find my document. Okay, can you all see that?
Yes.
It says class 2 standard. So what I'm going to do is just, first of all, preface what we have here by just saying that this is just maybe a conversation starter based on the conversations that we've had in several meetings prior to today. But it was really something that was that I needed to sit down and look at the actual rules around to see, you know, if what I was thinking about and what so many others continued to mention was actually possible. And so I had to do this with it, and I've reviewed it with a number of folks on today's call, but also I looked at the licensure application for class 2A and also made some revisions there, and you know, just to kind of tweak it based on what I was going to talk about today. And again, this is only a place to maybe start this conversation about some of these themes that continue to emerge. And I'm going to start way back at the bottom with this notion that every initial applicant for teacher licensure in Montana would come to the OPI for an application for what we would call in this case a class 2A. Not married to that, nothing. But it would be valid for up to 5 years, and the application fee paid at the time of application when they submit it for the class 2A could apply for the class 2 if it's within that 5-year span when they move up. And really, the clincher here with the class 2A is with every circumstance that I'm about to outline here. With every application for it, they have to submit to the OPI a verified plan to participate in a district or Montana Educator Preparation Program, mentorship program for the first 2 years of their teaching experience. And so they would submit that on the front end, whether it was signed by the district, they'd have 30 days or whatever. And right now we do that when we get our licenses, right? We take it up to the county superintendent. They sign off that we filed it with them, et cetera. And then we make sure that the OPI knows that that final step has taken place. So that would happen on the front end. And then on the back end, and when it was complete, they would sign off, and the superintendent or who's ever in the district, you know, whoever we would prescribe would have to sign off and verify that this had been completed before they could move into a class 2 standard license. A couple of things there that I'd just like to speak to as far as the mentorship program. I think there's a number of ways that this could go. Sharon spoke really well to the notion that, you know, the 55 does prescribe it for districts. And I guess what I would ask the committee to think about at OPI, if we were to make changes to this rule, what would an ideal mentorship program look like for Montana teachers who were under a class 2A, for all of our new folks coming into our classrooms? And when I broached this with a couple of our deans, this notion, I think they became very intrigued about this idea and the role even that our EPPs could play in this. And I think at the last meeting, I alluded to the fact that MSU is actually rolling out a 2-year online mentorship program, I think through the Learning Hub for their rural teachers program. And so that's just a model. It doesn't have to be the model. And the good news is that we don't have to decide today. So what I have here is this verified plan to participate in a district plan or a statewide plan, whatever. The devil will be in the details. But then I have here, to McCall's point about the data about pre-service teachers, and this is around, this first notion is built around some of the constructs that we know are already happening, and they're happening under an emergency authorization and maybe less strategically than we would like to see happen. So if an applicant is currently enrolled in a Montana Educator Prep program and the Montana EPP grants approval for a student teacher to earn credits toward degree completion while employed by a district on the quality educator shortage list, Upon initial application for a Class 2A license, the applicant must provide, and here you have all of the contractual pieces, et cetera. And I, even in the application, I just put a placeholder for all of these that, you know, would have to be submitted. And this is something that's not unique to districts. These are things that they do for every teacher. And then, and we just don't want to assume anything here, right? So I did include it, but there could be a section in the application where this gets checked off. A verified plan for supervision of the educator by the prep program on file at the OPI. And you know, again, another step there. And then a verified plan for induction support. And again, we would have to figure out what those pieces would look like and how that might look different for something, how that might look different from what I've outlined here as the mentorship. So that, you know, paves a path for something that we already know is happening, and we're using emergency authorizations to meet the needs of districts. We know that some of our ed prep students are ready for this opportunity, and we know that we have districts who are ready for them. So then I would move up here, and I'm sorry if this is kind of rough in how it looks, but then I would move up here. If the educator prep program completed by the applicant is not in Montana, or the applicant is licensed through an alternative pathway program, something we've also discussed, upon initial application of Class 2A license, they must provide this. And since we've talked about removing the praxis, I just X that out here just because it seems like the committee might be leaning that way. And I included the EFA course, verified completion of an accredited professional educator prep program. And one of the things here that would remain the same here for this down here below is these two pieces too. The intro for Ed, Indian Education for All. They would have to have that. This is the first time I've looked at it, but I've seen that I omitted it. But then they would have all of these pieces, verified completion of the accredited Ed prep program, supervised student teaching, or verified completion of an educator prep program, a current standard unrestricted out-of-state license, and 5 or 3 years. This is something that we've been talking about. And then a verified plan to participate in the district mentorship program. Now, one of the things too that I thought, you know, this might be something, okay, if we do go down to 3s, then it's an and this. Or if we get rid of it, I mean, you know, if we get rid of the years of experience, maybe what we do here, and you'll see where this is relevant in just a minute, maybe what we do is we say, okay, you know, maybe they don't bring any experience in, maybe they are from a non-traditional program. We're going to require them still to verify that they have a plan to participate in a mentorship program. And wait, this will come later up here. Now here, basically what you have here, if they're not in Montana for the initial Class 2A, again, same thing, verified plan to participate in a district EPP mentorship or EPP mentorship program for at least 2 years. So that's the clincher, right, with the Class 2A. And then here, if you go up here, these are all initial applicants. So anyway, I mean, this is just really the whole bucket of initial applicants right here. And what I was trying to do in those other parts is parse out some of the pieces and the populations that we have talked about, whether they're a military spouse, whether they're a pre-service teacher, or a person coming in from a non-traditional pathway. Then in order to move up to a Class 1 or a Class 2, a couple of things would have to happen. First of all, they would have to show that they verified participation completion in that mentorship program. And they would have to send that documentation to the Office of Public Instruction. Then down here, out-of-state licensees who are moving to Montana and are working to move from a 2A, this provisional, to a 2, must provide verification of 2 years of teaching in Montana within the window of this move from a 2A to an A. So within that 5-year span. And I think that really incentivizes not only coming here, but staying here and ideally in the same district. And then an out-of-state or non-traditional pathway applicant, because we've had a lot of conversation there, must teach for 3 consecutive years in Montana before a Class 1 or a Class 2 license will be granted, because there might be an opportunity for some of these people who are coming in with an MA, they may be ready to move into that Class 1. But Montana could benefit by requiring them to have been here 3 years before they get that license. And so I think that this is just a starting point. I wanted to share it with folks. I also worked on, as I indicated, what the application could look like. It doesn't grow it in too much length. And I'll see if I can just pull that up real quickly here. There it is. Okay,
So
can you
quick
see
question,
that?
Angela, just to clarify, this is essentially replacing class 5.
Well, it might. I think that it could. I think let's talk about a few things. I think it could mitigate what we're seeing on the end where our EPPs, our pre-service students, are becoming emergency authorized to go into a classroom. So there's that piece. I think you may still, I think what you do here, I think Jacob, yes, but I think what you do here is really quite magical in that, yes, we're going to say, we're going to take you from an out-of-state ed prep program, a non-traditional program. And if we remove those years or we lessen those years, we're going to take you and we're going to support you into a Montana classroom with just the 2 years. And it wouldn't necessarily negate, I don't think, all of what's in the chapter class 5, but I think that it provides maybe another alternative. So,
It's Julie, you got your hand up.
Thank you, Jacob. A couple of questions for Angela. So can you please explain, I'm wondering why there's a difference between the expectations of what a teacher from outside of Montana has versus someone inside Montana. What's delineating that?
So what is delineating that is what I was believing, what I was thinking I was hearing from the committee as far as recognizing experience from our ed prep programs, folks coming in from out of state ed prep programs or from non-traditional programs. That's what I think that we had talked about. I think a couple of meetings ago, folks had expressed some concerns on if we remove those years of experience. And so what I thought here, and initially in some of our conversations, Julie, some of the versions of this had actually marked out some of the years of experience from our out-of-state folks. And so it doesn't have to delineate, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But I think, in an effort to make sure that folks, had a place to start, I left the years of experience for those folks coming in from out-of-state EPPs and from non-traditional pathways with the years of experience. That could be a point of discussion for this group. And maybe those folks would say today or down the road that maybe we don't delineate out of state, in state. Everybody has to participate in the 2-year mentorship program as I have it here. But maybe what we say is, okay, you come in, you apply for a license, a 2A from out of state, we're going to grant it to you. You have to teach in Montana under this mentorship program for 2 years. But I did delineate, I left the years in for this model today. Just because I wasn't sure that we had the buy-in for folks to get rid of those 3 of what is 5 years right now, or even go down to 3. So I left language 5-3 in there, and folks can use that as a starting point. So I hope that helps. I mean, I really think that there's some real interest by folks in preserving some of those years of experience, to your point, or to your question, Julie, but I don't think that we necessarily have to. I mean, if we're going to open our doors to folks from out of state, let's say we're going to open our doors and we're going to provide them that 2 years of support in a very specific way through those 2 years of mentorship. And so maybe that negates the need for those 3 or 5 years. Maybe they get them here. One other thing that I just wanted to point out here that I didn't get to on what I shared with you is that the years of teaching in Montana, the verification of 2 years of teaching in Montana, and then the out-of-state non-traditional for 3 consecutive years. And again, maybe that's something that we change, but I guess partly there too, Julie, I think that, opening those doors, so they come in without any experience. We'd like for their teaching experience to be in Montana if they're going to advance in licensure, right?
So Christy, you have your hand up.
We
Go ahead.
incentivized them staying.
I think Julie had a few more questions, which is fine. She may actually ask what I was going to ask.
Thanks, Crystal. Yeah, just a couple of other things I was thinking about a little bit, and I have not had a lot of time to dig into this, Angela, as you're just presenting this, as you had mentioned. I'm thinking a little bit about what Sharon had mentioned about Chapter 55, like what really is the school's district responsibility versus what is the teacher's responsibility? Because a school who's really working to retain teachers and grow their teachers is a quality school as an environment, and are they responsible for doing things that help invest in their educators to keep them there and grow them and keep them, for more than 2 years at a time. That said, I'm wondering, like, how does this then land on the responsibility of a teacher? If their school is not providing that mentorship, how do they engage on that, and how much cost is that on the teacher? And is that the teacher's then responsibility? And if it doesn't happen because they can't access it or whatever may come, does that become a barrier for some teachers, not because of not their own desire or willingness to participate, but rather it's just not something that's available to them? And I think about our teachers' time and effort. So I'm just wondering of when we're thinking about quality school versus quality educator, which they're very much related, right? You have to have quality educators to make a quality school, but quality schools keep quality educators. So there's almost a very close relationship. So when you're bringing this up, I'm wondering, like, where does the responsibility land? And then the last thing, I think the next question I would say, and I'll just leave it at that, is I think about in the office around what it takes to get verification for experience, even for teachers when they have to validate that. The level of, if you will, paperwork sometimes becomes barriers and bog down a process. So there's a part of me that is saying, how do we simplify? How do we streamline? How do we really help ensure that we get quality educators and that we're licensing them? So for me, like, what defines quality to get that initial license? So I can appreciate the tiers of saying, okay, everybody could come in at this level, right? Not everybody. Those who meet the requirements could come at this level. But then what does it mean to move to that next level? And so I'm just thinking about the financial burden and the some of the effort that a mentorship and induction program should be more on the school, not on the teacher. I'm going to hold there. Thanks, Jacob.
Sharon.
Thanks. And thank you for the opportunity to respond. It is indeed on the school district to provide that. And I guess my question in part for OPI then is, when they submit the team's report for, do you have a mentorship program? Do you have an induction program? Is that just, when I was on the board and we put that language in there in Chapter 55, it was my hope that that wasn't just a check the box, that there was in fact required from the school district some evidence that they had actually done the induction and mentoring program. And if in fact there's evidence required from OPI that they've done a mentoring program, that they've done the induction program, then because that's a program that's already in place, because that's what Chapter 55 requires, if that's already there, then the teacher is simply taking advantage of what the district is already providing them, because it's in rule that they're supposed to. So I guess it's my hope that on the form that districts are filling out, it's not just to check the box. Yes, we have that. What's the evidence? Where is it? When was it offered? And if that's already in place, it's easy for a teacher to say, yes, I had that. And in fact, I can also reference the report your office turned in, that my office turned into OPI as well, because it's already there. And I guess to the point of streamlining, I'm not, as a math teacher, I'm not too sure that the streamlining and licensing teachers quickly is overlapping very well with teacher quality. I love that Chapter 57 task force discussion is having a lot of conversations about teacher quality. I'm afraid, though, that when we suggest streamlining, what's actually being asked is to eliminate some requirements that we previously thought did ensure teacher quality. So I think the tiered process might be a helpful checkbox for OPI to engage in, but there is no doubt that it will take more staff than what you have now. And I think we've discussed that before too. Thank you.
I think that's right, Sharon. I think the preservation of quality, and Julie, you mentioned that's so well. And I think what we're saying is that what we want to do is make sure that we bring quality teachers into the profession, into the classroom, and continue to support them in making them better through this effort. And you mentioned, Julie, the requirement that is in Chapter 5. And what I saw this as an opportunity to do was really in a strategic way for these districts that we hear from year in and year out.
Angela, can you pause for just a second? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Dan, did you jump off already? Dan had to leave. I wanted to catch him before he left to see if he could. I wanted to comment on him on the supervision piece for the district. I'm sorry, Angela. Go ahead. I apologize.
Oh, no problem. No problem. I'm sorry, Dan had to leave. But year in and year out, we provide whatever this mentorship would look like. And the good news is that once this would make its way through the board, through CISPAC and then to the board, I mean, we would have time to come back and say, what are some models that would work? And then districts could work with OPI, work with our office, work with EPPs to support teachers. I just think that there is power in that. And we have the piece in 55. But to Sharon's point, I think that we have a real opportunity on the front end and on the back end, and maybe even after that first year, to check on the fact that it's being delivered. And we can assess this, we can monitor it. And one of the statements that I made to the Board of Public Ed at the July meeting was that when they asked what we can do to help mitigate educator recruitment and retention needs across the state, my comment back was, recognize that we're making changes to Chapter 57 and Chapter 58, and that we may need to circle back with you in the next year or so, or maybe a couple of years, and maybe take another look at some of those changes that we made. So to be flexible and be willing to take another look at that. And I think that this is one of those opportunities that might be worth taking a look at.
Diane, please go ahead. Apologize for you having to wait. Muted, Diane. Sorry.
Was unmuted at one time and then decided to wait. Thinking about our accreditation standards in Chapter 55, we know we can have full accreditation, we can have accreditation with advice, we can have accreditation with deficiency. There are many ways during which an intended or required mentoring program may be less than stellar. And so I'm hoping that we can work with, I would like to see us work with the Learning Hub and the university system might make their mentoring program available somehow, so that there is an alternative, and a difficulty in a district wouldn't prevent a teacher from being able to access, readily access a mentoring program in maybe an alternative way. The other thing is, I think we might have a great opportunity because, well, what else is OPI doing? They're so busy. They're also doing a new data system and trying to integrate all the technology they have. And what an opportunity this might be to be sure that we get on the front end of that verification, an easy way for districts to verify and make this easier, but also provide more complete information to all of us about whether this is actually being done, and districts can, submit it more readily. So that's what I'm thinking today.
So through this, well, what's unclear to me at this point, that if we could make more clear might be useful, is let's just not think about out of state, in state, but who's, like, you have broken 2 into 2A. That's sort of what we looked at, and pulled in some of what happens in 5 right now. Outside of 5 currently requires a bachelor's degree, and the 2A doesn't, because you could still be in a program. But like, who's eligible for a 2A, right? Like that's, and then like, who's eligible for a 2? Like, those are the things that I think we can think about in simple terms. And like, you're eligible for a 2A if you've got this, and if you want to move to a 2, you need this. And just kind of think about that process. And we don't have to use that term. I'm just using what we had just looked at to sort of think about. So whether it's 5 or 120, it doesn't matter what we call the class. But like, who's here? What do you need to move here? What do you need to move to the next step? Like, that's what I would like to think about it. Cheryl, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I actually, in listening to the conversation, was reflecting on the role of the school district superintendent, of which we have several on the call who've been pretty quiet about this discussion, because there's a premise to the conversation is that somehow our districts and superintendents perhaps are not doing this. And so I'm hopeful that we're not making presumptions without actually clearly listening to those that are responsible for the implementation of this work and the elements. And I think it's important and appreciated Jewel's comments is effective mentorship, the same way as effective teaching, because they're both fall in the same category, comes down to the ability of the individual facilitating.
Cheryl, you're on mute again.
Great, thank you. Let me try this again. I hope you all could read my lips. First and foremost, I would really caution us not to make a presumption that our school districts are not doing mentoring and inducting. We have several superintendents that are part of this call, and their voice on this has been pretty quiet. So we're talking from perspectives or thoughts without really perhaps understanding what actually may be happening at their level. The other piece I would add to you is the effectiveness of learning as we know today, whether it is adult learning or whether it is student learning, is predicated upon which Jewel just shared with us, and that is the ability to personalize to the specific needs of the learner. So when we start talking about the constructs of mentoring, I believe that's probably why it rests at the local district, because they know what the unique needs are in their communities. They know how to meet the specific needs of that learner, ensuring that they are tying those most effective teachers or those professional master teachers that are able to support that. So would really, really remind folks that the voice from the field that actually does this work is a really vital component. Thank you.
Mike, are you with us? We haven't seen you yet. May just be listening. Thank you, Cheryl. That to your point is why I was hoping to catch Dan before he had to jump off. But well, Mike, if you have any thoughts in relation to this conversation from your point of view, please feel free to put those in the chat as well. If you're unavailable to jump in. Erica, go ahead.
So I have been in several districts where we've had mentoring programs. I've overseen mentoring programs, and some have been great and some have been not so great. Probably the best mentoring program I've ever been involved with was a very, very informal one, because I had teachers who were extremely invested in the process and really worked on their own to mentor myself and other people. I've worked with a mentoring program where we worked very hard and had very clear guidelines, and some of the teachers did great and others didn't. So I guess if I can see the real advantage of a mentoring program, but I would like to see some really clear guidance. And I guess being from a very small district, writing that guidance and putting that guidance in place is really laborious, and somebody mentioned earlier, time consuming. So I would like to see some real consistency with that as we put that in place. And I guess, and Dennis was getting off, talked about the J1 visa. Many small school districts are, and myself included, hiring Filipino teachers to help fill positions. For those teachers especially, sorry, I thought I lost that, but for those teachers, especially a mentoring program, and I'm putting one in place for my teachers, but is extremely beneficial. So I think that's maybe what Dan was alluding to.
So the language that Angela had shared, and I think if you look at other states, the piece that might be in a licensure language can in most cases are written where it easily could become a checkbox. All right, like, I mean, even as Angela had it written, it's completion of, verified by a district. So nothing stops a district from verifying that it took place that then does not speak to the quality of what took place. And I think that's more common than not across the language. So I think that the larger question here may be less about what the policy in terms of the mentoring program looks like, I guess, in terms of like, is it something that is central to require that then districts to put the burden on the districts to figure out what it looks like in ways that potentially happens. Not saying there wouldn't be any support that would come from OPI or the EPPs who have also been written in there to offer mentorship programs. But that is in some ways divorced from the two, right? Like, I mean, in terms of what the language might be in 57 and what the policy would be. Erica, did you put your hand back up? Sorry.
No, somebody alluded earlier, and I am sorry, I can't remember who it was, but using the Learning Hub. And I think part of a big piece of that really needs to be training so that we do get quality mentors out there. I think that should be some very strong criteria that they have to go through training so they know what what we expect of them. And so it's not just check the box.
So we are talking a lot about some piece, including in the language, that there is for at least a couple levels of the licensing before you can get your what is currently a professional license, right? What we would call in Montana. If we think about 2 steps before that, some mentoring piece is what Angela has proposed. Tristan, if you can help me with people who are on the call. Crystal, go ahead before I continue.
So the question I had earlier, and it didn't get addressed, and I guess I would just want to consider, and it may be in there, Angela, again, I haven't seen that document, and this was the first that we've heard. What about, I'm looking at out-of-state people that maybe in their district went through a mentoring program. Do they still need to come to Montana and do a mentoring program? I think that would be redundant. Can give the example. I taught in Pennsylvania for 7 years, had a mentorship, had a master's degree, and came to Montana. So are you saying that I need to have a two years before I can get my professional license and have another mentor? I think that would need to be addressed in the language if it's not already, was just my input for that.
I mean, I think that anything is possible right now. I mean, I just put this out there as a place where folks could start. I do think it is very important for folks coming in to any of our communities in Montana, especially our most rural communities, to have an additional layer of support. And I think if we can provide it through a licensure mechanism in a strategic way to ensure that this person who leaves their home, their state where they've lived to come to Montana to teach, and they're going to be teaching in one of our most rural districts or anywhere in Montana, let's find a way to support them, irrespective of where they come, so that there's a greater degree that they have what they need there. So hopefully they'll stay there longer or stay in Montana longer and continue to fill our educator needs. And so now what I have there is just a template for folks to start with, though. I will tell you that, but I do think that I just don't see any harm in making sure that somebody coming to Montana to teach Montana students would have all of the supports and the infrastructure there in a very strategic way. And if I could go back to Cheryl's comment, I guess I just want to reiterate that I was making no assumptions about what superintendents or districts were or were not doing in regards to mentorship. And in fact, I actually allowed in my language the opportunity for districts to provide the mentorship. And I just thought that with this, it might lend itself to more strategic checking, maybe from the OPI, and maybe more strategic thinking about it on the district level. If they're putting in on the front end of a year, putting something in on the back end of a year, saying, what did I do around mentorship? And I do think that there's a number of ways that we can go around this to develop something that is quality. that can be delivered across the state, and it could be district, or it could be something that is something maybe done more through the hub. We don't have to decide it today.
I think there's, Jacob, I just want to kind of go back to that. I think there's a huge assumption that teachers from out of state are not prepared to teach in Montana. And I just don't really find that to be true. I'm not trying to start an argument or a disagreement, but I just really think that we need to stop taking the barriers down for out of state teachers. I moved from Washington, D.C. to Wolf Creek, Montana to a one-room schoolhouse, and I did great because I had experience, I had background, and I had, mentorship in terms of my county superintendent. But to say that I wasn't qualified for a Class 1 license because I didn't have a mentorship in Montana, I just think is not the right way to look at it. And I would love to dig into this deeper. This is my passion, as you can hear, and maybe because it is personal to me. And I think that's a good thing. That makes me, really want to look at all sides of it, because I want what's best for Montana and our teacher, the teachers here. But I really think that we need to be careful and just assuming that teachers that come from out of state or out of country even are just not prepared. So I just don't think it's as an easy and cut and dry as that. So I appreciate more conversation.
Sue, please go ahead. And then after Sue, we're gonna take an open vote on whether or not we need to continue this conversation or not. On the mentoring piece, because we've had a lot of talk, but I don't know that we have consensus there. Everybody thinks it's something we need to continue to talk about. So Sue, go ahead, and then we're gonna.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. I agree that the mentoring program is crucial to retaining teachers. And I know up here at the Flathead in School District 5, we've had a mentoring program for years that has been very successful, very well documented, but we have two different mentoring programs. One is for teachers that are new to teaching, and the other one is for teachers who are new to the district. They're the experienced teachers. They need a different kind of mentoring, and we have recognized that. We've changed the program into this. In fact, the teachers who are new to teaching get a 2-year mentoring program. Teachers who are new to the district, it's only a 1-year program. And it's exactly, it's working beautifully for us because we recognize, the experience of those teachers who have moved in. Thanks.
So, yeah, and I think that's a great idea, Sue. And I just want to reiterate and remind everyone we're in Chapter 57 for licensure. And so as we're diving into all these different avenues for what type of mentorship there should be, does that really belong in licensure? Or is that more in a different area? Because I just don't know. We're really getting into the weeds of this. And I'm not saying that it's not a good area. I think that it is. I think mentorship's important, but we've now spent 2 sessions kind of talking through it and think that is this the place for the discussion? And if it is, where does it fit in? And if it's not, then where does it need to go? Because I'm not trying to say the urgency, but I think there's so many areas of Chapter 57 that we need to look at, and we're looking at just mentorship. And is that really where we need to be putting so much emphasis in for 2 meetings?
Sharon, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I'll address that, Crystal, I think in part because I brought that up. It was evident in a lot of the tiered licensure pieces that you sent us. So I guess I thought from your perspective, that's why you wanted us to look at that. I didn't run down those documents myself. You sent them.
No, and I understand. I know that it's a part of a license, but if we're getting into what type of mentorship and where does it hold? And so what I'm saying is if we think that it needs to be a component, that can be the recommendation and stop it at that. I'm just, I just think we're going too far into the who needs it, who needs what, that's not really, I don't think, for us to decide. I absolutely support the idea. And yes, it is in a lot of states' models. I just think that we're starting to really get in, and we did this at the last meeting too, we're really getting into the weeds of it and what it looks like. And I don't know if we need to actually do that or just vote on, do we think this needs to be a thing? That's all I meant. So I'm not saying that it's not important. I just think maybe we could stop the conversation there.
I think that's exactly what we're all talking about. I do too. I think just keep the I guess what I would like to see is keep the mentorship language in the conversation, have it be a part of initial licensure. That's what I've been saying, is we don't have to decide it today. Even once this would become rule, if that were to happen, then that becomes the work that we all do together, is say, okay, how's this going to shake out specifically? I think that's exactly right. I do think there's a place in licensure to make sure that we have the mentorship component though.
Julie. And then we will determine whether or not we want to continue to talk about this after Julie.
I was just thinking about what Sharon was saying a little bit there about tiered systems, right? But the reasons for the tiers in many of the states, there's different ways that they tier them. Mentorship isn't in every one of the tiers, right? But the idea of the tier is, where do you enter? In which tier? Which way do you get a license? At what level? Is it in Montana? Is it at class 5? Is it a class 2? Is it a class 1? It all depends on where you're entering, what justifies you to get that. And then how do you keep it, right? And so how do you maintain, renew, continue to show that? That's another component. And the last thing is, and how are you advancing it, right? And so some of the tiers are about, 1, which tier are you entering on? 2, how do you keep in that tier to maintain that tier? Or how do you advance to the next tier? And so some of that tiered systems that we saw in the samples that were shared, mentorship was part of it. Some of it is around experience. Some of it is around, I think, John, you had mentioned it, like evaluations, right? Satisfactory evaluations. And Diane said, I'm worried about that a little bit, right? So I think that when we're looking at those tiers, there's different levels that people enter to get one. There's different places and be able to keep a license. And then what has to happen to advance a license. And so I think that's the purpose of tiers, if you will. And mentorship could be a part of some of the tiers, as well as other things.
So, Tristan, can you help me with a roll call vote? The question is, do we think that some form of mentorship / support is something that should be included in licensing arm in Montana? That's the general question. Should any kind of language, right? We don't know what the language is, but any kind of language around mentorship support be included in ARM licensure language in Montana? It's just a yes or no vote. Tristan, if you would call roll and a vote for me, could you?
Yes, I can do that. Let me get kind of set up here so that I can say names and type at the same time. All right, here we go. We'll start with Angela.
Yes. Thanks.
Diane.
Yes.
Sharon.
Yes.
McCall.
Yes.
Sue.
Yes.
Christine. Christine.
Oh, Christine, we can't hear you. Maybe you can just type it in. Oh,
No.
No.
oh, okay.
Erica.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Mike.
Yes.
Valerie.
Val, are you with us? Last call, Val. Okay. Was that everybody, Tristan?
Jewel.
Yes.
And I think that was it. Did I miss anyone?
No.
Okay, well, we certainly had our percentage up for consensus in that vote with the group that's here. That we needed to continue the discussion as to what the language looks like. Crystal, if you want to put the PowerPoint back up, I think we are probably best to try and give us some further direction moving forward.
Can you see it?
I can see it, yes. So we identified something essential that we wanted to include, certainly our question number 2, and we will continue that discussion. Let's move on to the next slide. And Crystal, jump in. I have thoughts, so I'm just going to keep rambling if that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
We have a larger chapter, right? So we are going to continue our conversation around teacher licensure, but there's a lot more in the entire arm in chapter 57. And we know from our previous work and this whole conversation that as we make adjustments, there's cascading effects that impact it. So we wanted to try and give us more clarifying lens to think about as we move forward. And the National Council on Teacher Quality has 5 of those they sort of think about in terms of teacher licensing. There's reciprocity, which we had quite a bit of discussion around. I think it's important to consider back to that piece as we consider this conversation, especially for teachers, is to open that up and just really think about what do you need to get a license, and then what do you need to keep it, and what you need to move forward, such as Julie said. And the consideration then moving forward in those buckets is, does it matter if you're coming from out of state or not, that we can consider. And then there's the issue of tests, which we've looked at. I had quite a bit of conversation around. There's and emergency licensure. So for me, there's also sort of 2 differentiating categories that we could think about as we move forward. And I'm thinking of a structure maybe we can do some homework around. Nothing's firm yet, but there's sort of like this entry into the licensure with a bachelor's degree. And then there's entry in potentially without a bachelor's degree. And that's sort of 2 different entry places. And that's set up a little bit in the Montana licensure now. And if we think about those two doors without having that considerations of in-state or out of state, that could be a good place to start. And then there are other big sections. You can go to the next slide, Crystal. In the ARM itself, right? So there's just the general information, which is definitions, chapter 2, issuance, subchapter 3, the endorsement areas, which we talked a little bit about, which is still pretty huge. We need to dig into. 4, where we spent most of our time today, chapter 5, ancillary services, and then 6, which is any kind of disciplinary procedures. I think we really need to help us move forward in this conversation and to firm it up. We're going to need some clear input from the task force onto what else in these other subchapters do you see that are issues, so that we know where we can target. Because while we've had really rich conversations, we've talked about our timeline, and we know that we have flexibility, and we want to make sure that we have the deepest conversations we can have, but we need to also think about having at some point, we're going to have some focused conversations on some specific pieces that might be small tweaks too. That'll be easier to deal with. So if we're going to ask if everybody could really just put some thought into this and take a look at what you've heard or what you've experienced, or even dig back into the ARM again and look at those subchapters and see if there are some specifics that we need to put on a list that we need to get to. And I think we will try to collect that between now and next week.
So can I jump in, Jacob? So I'm wondering if what we were going to have them do with my spreadsheet could be homework, because it's not a lot of thought. It's just making check marks. So I'm thinking maybe we could shift gears so that we're not wasting time next week doing that. And that could be the homework. Is that what you were thinking?
Yes, I was thinking something, along those lines.
Perfect.
100%.
Okay, keep going.
So do you want to show that spreadsheet quickly, Crystal, and just show them what we're going to ask them to do?
Sure. Give me 1 second.
That last slide is important. If you have any questions, please email Crystal and Tristan.
Also, you'll have to share it to tristan.belknap2@OPI Connect. That one's confusing. I apologize.
No, I'll put that into directions, Tristan, just remind me. So what I did here was that I broke apart the subchapters. So at the bottom, you see tabs for each one. And so what we would ask you to do, and I don't think we were going to split into groups so that you don't have to look at every single one of the subchapters. But even if you just want to give input on the one that you feel is, you want to address, all you have to do is literally review the subchapter verbiage, say, and then I made it super easy. You check if you want to leave it, if you want to delete it, enhance the selection or section, or if it needs intense work, just so then we can gauge areas that we may be missing, areas that, and we're going to do this at the OPI as well. Julie and I are going to spend a lot of time looking at our unusual cases, things that come through licensure committee that go to BPE, and bring those to you as well as discussion points, because I think it's important for you to hear. I know a lot of you attend some of the BPE meetings or are part of them, but some of you that aren't, it's important to hear some of the things that come to us as well. So it's that, that relationship. So I will give detailed directions on this. It's really not, it's not hard, and it won't be time consuming, especially if you just say, I'm going to look at subchapter 4 and 5. That's all I have time for. That's more input than we'd have, without it. So it's just giving us good grasp of other areas that we need to look at. And like I said, I'll give directions on how to find this, what to do. But I think it would be time well spent, rather than we were going to do this today, like as a group. And I don't want to necessarily do that next week, because I think we need to keep the conversation moving. So I think homework would be the best thing for it.
Thank you, Crystal. And then also, Crystal, you're going to have some points too as well, right? That you see in the licensing applications that we could focus on?
Yes. Yep. And in licensure committee, absolutely. And it was asked if I could link the chapters to this document, so you only have to look at one thing. And I absolutely can do that now that it's homework. I did not have time last night as I was working on this to do that, but now that I have just a little more time, I will link it so that you only have to look at one thing. So that's no problem at all.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions about this? Angela, is it possible you could share your work with the group too, so everybody can get to see it? I see Angela saying yes. So she will send that around. Everybody could take a look at it and have further thoughts. If you're reviewing that and you have some very specific thoughts, if you could send those to Tristan prior to next Wednesday, that would be helpful too, because then we'll know sort of areas that we could guide the discussion as well. It's always helpful to help us move more efficiently if we know what it is we might want to talk about before we start. Yes, certainly. We cannot stress that enough, Angela. You're correct. Angela's not saying these are our recommendations. They're just points for thought. Right. So it's her brainstorming that maybe other people can use to get ideas to get us going.
Without looking at the spreadsheet, is there anything in there on what you would have us take a look at, maybe around the class 8 or the class 4, Crystal?
Yes, so that would be within subchapter 4. And then they're all listed here. And again, it's not, I mean, it looks super tedious. It's really not, in terms of if you just look at the subchapter quickly glance at it and think that it's fine, you know, we're not asking for even any information. I think it'd be great if you wanted to provide that, but it's really just, it'll be an easy way for us to check, you know, if there's people that are saying intense work needs in a certain area or even just enhance, you know, it's an easy way for us to sort of see what areas we still need to address without asking everybody all at once and having conversations going a million different ways. Sharon,
Yeah, if, so if there's intense work needed or whatever, do you mind if we put that in the, oh, I don't know, where, if there's an extra comment that we want to make to you there that could help you?
how about I add another column?
There you go.
Comment, extra comments.
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. I was
Then
going to
you'll
do that, but I didn't want
Yeah.
to make it seem like you had to do it. I'll put
No, but
I'll put
then
options.
you'll get a chance to look at that earlier, and then it'll facilitate next week, I think, faster.
Yep. I'm just gonna keep the optional so people don't get dissuaded from doing
Yep.
this, thinking they have to put a lot of words.
I know, but and so everybody knows, most of those things are just 1 or 2 lines, so it isn't.
No.
It looks intimidating, but like you said, it really isn't.
No, and if you have one specific subchapter you really want to focus on,
Yep.
by all means, you don't have to do all of them. So I think it'll really just help us stay focused and keep going, keep the ball rolling. With that said, Jacob, any final thoughts, words?
Thank you. Thank you to everybody. We'll see you again next week. And I appreciate the conversation. I think the passion and thought that everybody puts into this is very useful, and I look forward to next week.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree. And I think that the passion that we all have, you know, our end goal is to get quality teachers to our kids. And we're working hard to do that in all areas, you know, at our schools, here at the OPI, at BPE, higher ed, you know, we're trying to work together, and that's all we can do. So your thoughts and comments and input are so appreciated. You know how to reach me if you have anything in between the meetings. And yeah, looking forward to next week, and I hope that you have a great rest of your week. Thank you.